I'm Heidi Priebe,
I'm Denzel Mensah.
and do you want to kick us off with our topic?
Yeah, so today we're going to be talking about sensor versus intuitive communication. And we thought that this would be fitting for Thanksgiving tomorrow because, this is when a lot of families come together. You'll definitely have a lot of sensors, you'll definitely have a lot of intuitives coming together. And, maybe I made a joke like, oh, you probably don't always follow along with, Uncle Sam's, stories and abstract speaking, and there maybe won't be able to like really communicate well with Aunt Gertrude's, details and all of that. And so we're just going to be giving a few tips on like how to pretty much bridge that gap of communication because it's not a bad thing to be a sensor nor an intuitive. Neither is better than the other as well. It's just a great way to learn how to speak each other's language and better understand each other.
Intuitives versus sensors tend to communicate very differently, and we get a lot of questions about how to bridge that gap. So we want to touch on where those differences come from, first of all, and then what we can do about that to help you communicate better no matter who you're speaking with. So, the first thing that came to mind when I was thinking about this topic was why this is such a big divide, like why it is that sensors and intuitives tend to have so much trouble relating to each other in conversation a lot of the time. And I think a big one is that a lot of people aren't even necessarily aware, A, of personality theory, or B, of the fact that they're expecting a certain thing out of an interaction and what they're getting back is different. When intuitives go into interactions, they usually want to talk about their latest idea or how things fit together based on other pieces of information they have. And they're going to quickly move away from things like concrete facts and details, why things work the way they do in like a concrete, specific way. And they want to kind of jump right to what they perceive to be the exciting part, which is the idea of it and what could happen in the future if we follow that path. Whereas sensors like to take things in the opposite direction. So first they want to look at, how does this tangibly play out? Is this realistic? How would it be realistic if we want something to happen? And then what can we do with that information now that we have it? I would say the first step to easing communication between the two would just be to manage your expectations and understand that the person you're speaking with isn't necessarily going to be on your train of thought, and that you can, based on some of the topics that we're going to talk about after this, you can come prepared to any interaction with kind of like back pocket tools that will help you realize, okay, I'm talking to a sensor. Here is how I'm going to modify my approach so that my ideas come across to them in a way that makes sense for them, and vice versa for sensors talking to intuitives.
A big note that's pretty much going to be like prominent throughout this whole discussion is pretty much that sensors are better with details and intuitives are better with like big picture type speaking. And so if you are going to be communicating to each other, you have to try and understand and realize that like if you're an intuitive speaking to a sensor, if you are aware of this, then it's a big tip to try and put as much detail as you can, even though that's not like natural for you. If you really want to effectively communicate to that sensor, then try to do the best that you can with putting detail and putting things in sequential order, and not being like too abstract or too vague in the things that you're speaking. And then in the same sense with sensors speaking to intuitives, although there's predominantly more sensors in the world, it still would help to learn a little bit more how to speak more in the intuitive language, like, putting like a little bit more like symbolism even behind some of the things that you might be speaking. So sensors, if you are annoyed by, like metaphorical speech and like parables and all of that, like give grace to the intuitives, and for the intuitives, try and like learn how to like be a little bit more linear and like just detail oriented.
I think SJs are going to be your detail people.
Yeah.
SPs are going to be a lot, they don't necessarily want the specifics. Like they're not going to be the ones asking me like, what time are we doing this? Like getting down to the nitty gritty, because they're a little bit more fluid in their own worldview. But I think they're going to want things based on factual arguments as opposed to theoretical ones. So I think either way, it might not necessarily be the details, but it needs to be grounded in reality. If you're an intuitive speaking to a sensor, you're not going to have them naturally just jump on board the idea train and want to ride it all the way to the end of the world. You might get them excited about it, but at some point they're going to go, wait a minute, how are we going to do this? How are we going to or is there a reason that we're even talking about this? Like intuitives will get caught up in these very long, almost philosophical discussions over issues that need to be solved, and they'll never come to a solution, and that's when you really need good sensor intuitive in communication to be able to bring both sides to something. But it's of course about recognizing how you can do that in a productive way.
Intuitives somehow love to brag on how much they hate small talk. The intuitive sees it as sort of shallow or meaningless. If we're not talking about the grand scheme of society and other ideals or whatever, then I don't want to sit around and talk about the weather or even sports or stuff like that. But I think that intuitives have to understand that one thing that I picked up on was small talk can lead to a more deeper and grand type of discussion. And so I would say another tip for intuitives is to have more tolerance for small talk and understand ways to guide small talk conversation into deeper conversation with sensors, because it's not that they're incapable of having deep conversation. Trust me, that's not the case. It's just that sometimes, just like what Heidi was saying, they like to talk more about what's here now, or what's reliable, and detailed oriented things, or reality, and it's not as natural for them to just always go into deeper conceptual type of discussions. And so definitely be mindful of that. And there's a reason that we have both types of people. One is not better than the other. We should learn from each other to meet in the middle ground. So
exactly. And I think that's why it becomes a really powerful combo too, when you're able to find a topic that both people are really interested in. That's what I always try to do personally when I'm trying to find common ground with a type that I recognize to be a sensing type that I don't naturally seem to have much to talk about with, is find a topic we both like. Ask them, what they do in their spare time, and that's where that small talk is going to lead to bigger things, because once you can find a topic to connect on, it can be a really powerful combination when they're telling you about something they love and you're going, well, what about in this scenario? And then, often they have this incredible depth of knowledge and understanding of the things that they're passionate about. Particularly, SJ types tend to go very, very deep into their interests. So it's a really fun combination, because it's kind of like, as an intuitive, now you're rooting through this plethora of knowledge and understanding that they have. And you're able to, that can engage your intuition because you're making connections within that. But that's something we don't do very often, because we, if you're annoyed by the initial small talk phase or something like that, and just let it shut down there, you never get there. I think a good thing to do, if you're recognizing that you're in an intuitive sensor conversation and you're on either end of it and you can't find something to connect on, your communication isn't natural, try to find a shared interest. And I think you'll find that your conversation tactics naturally complement each other in those ways.
Mm-hmm. A lot of times, intuitives, they're so busy predicting what the other person's going to say or how the conversation's going to go, that after the first two sentences that someone speaks, they just shut out because they're ready to say whatever they have to say. And I encourage us to become better listeners to the sensors. Don't always feel like, I already know this is where it's going to go. And so you just shut off after the first 2-3 sentences that somebody speaks. But actually listen to everything in entirety before you speak up and everything. And in the same sense, I would advise that, sensors be patient with us on that.
I think part of that also comes from the fact that knowing means something different to intuitives than sensors. So I think sensors really, before they say that they know about a topic, I think they want a really deep, nuanced understanding of it. Whereas because intuitives are really interested in the main points of things, they want the takeaway, the kind of grand scheme and how it fits into other things. A lot of the time, I think they can say, I know about a topic that they actually don't know nearly as much about as the sensor who they're talking to does.
Yes.
Because the sensor has all the facts and all the actual information. And not to say that intuitives can't develop a wide knowledge base. They absolutely can. But I think that they're more likely to claim to almost know more than they do in terms of actual facts about a topic. And this depends a little bit on the type of intuitive. In general, I do think that sensors tend to collect more of the actual concrete information before they claim that they have a deep understanding of a topic. So I think that that can be an area too where there's just confusion because they're saying different things when they say I know.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree.
Common kind of trap that sensing types fall into when they're talking to intuitives is that they don't understand that the intuitive almost needs to overcomplicate it in order to simplify it, because they need to talk around it and kind of get it from different vantage points and realize, okay, now that I see this in context, I understand what we're talking about. Whereas a sensing type is like, well, I just told you what we're talking about. This should be easy. So I think there can be a lot of frustration there. And I think that as a sensor talking to an intuitive, that's something to just be prepared for and just kind of understand. They're going to need to talk around the topic before they can fully feel as though they understand it properly. Yeah. And don't shut that down, because you're shutting down their ability to understand things deeply. And if you want to work effectively together in any, realistic way, you're going to have to humor that in them and allow them to come to those conclusions. Of course, you can't let it go on forever, obviously. But to a certain extent, that's something that's very important for intuitives to do. This is a very subtle thing, but whenever I'm trying to decide if someone's an SE DOM, so an ESTP or an ESFP, or an ENFP versus or ENTP, so NE versus SE DOM, I look at how they tell stories, because SE DOMs are usually very wonderful, vivid storytellers, because they pick up on everything that's happened and they'll like whisk you away into this world of like, and then this happened, and then this crazy thing was going on. They have all these funny little like facts they pulled out and like details they noticed that like throw in there in like unconventional moments that are really funny and engaging. Whereas like any DOMs, it's so hard to tell a cohesive linear story for us, because like I can't tell you a single thing that happened without branching off into like, and the reason that probably happened is because like I have this theory about how this works like this, and you never get the story finished, whereas sensors can actually like begin and end a story. So that's actually like a specific tool I use for distinguishing SE versus NE DOMs. SI users, I think, tell stories in a very, I don't know, a more detailed way, but also I feel like they can exaggerate things, like certain traits people have and stuff, to kind of complete them like funny and entertaining.
Yeah.
Whereas I think SC users are more likely to conflate the experience of what happened. Or like reactions or something.
NI users are always looking for like higher insight, or like, what did God tell me through this message or whatever, like through this life experience in some sense. And for me, I've also seen like SI DOMs to be very detailed. Like they seem, from what I've seen from what I have witnessed, to like remember everything that's happened when they're telling a story, to the point where like they can drag a story on like really long, but it's just fascinating to me how like they can remember like what the person was wearing, what time it was, what face they made, like all of that. And I think that's one way that you can also distinguish between NI, SI. One time I was telling a story about just chasing after a bus, that I put it on YouTube and everything, like how, most people would just see it as like, oh, he ran after the bus and he caught it. But then I told the story in such a way where I got this whole deep, insightful meaning that I believe that God was speaking to me through, and all of that. And I think that that's one way, like NI users, they use their SE to get insight, like, or to like see like their experience or whatever they're experiencing, and then take a deeper meaning out of that. That's how they end up like realizing like who they are, like they learn from their experiences in that sense.
All right, well, unfortunately we're up for time today, but we hope you guys all have awesome, happy Thanksgivings, and that you use some of these suggestions if you need them, and that no one gets into any brawls tonight at the Thanksgiving table, at least not over personality.
Yeah, for sure. And guess we'll see you guys next time.
We'll see you guys next week.
I'm David Bowder, CEO of SPASIGMA. Every day, each of us is surrounded by a great diversity of people, and indeed, personalities. Some people we find it very easy to relate to. Others, not so much so. Our program exists to help you make sense of your own personality, as well as the diverse personalities around you, to help you improve both your personal and professional lives. Shakespeare said, "To thine own self be true." We'll teach you to understand how to reach the diverse personalities around you, to communicate with them in a way that integrates who you are with who they are. So enough talk about all this. Welcome to SPASIGMA's Personality Quotient PQ program. Enjoy the journey.